All right, thanks, Alex. Bulavanaka colleagues, and thank you for joining us for the Terrestrial Protected Area Action Track. This is titled Bringing Our Pacific Lands Under Meaningful Protection. My name is Paul van den Wiegen. I am the Protected and Conserved Areas Program Coordinator with IUCN Oceania here in Fiji. As with the marine session, it's important for us to explore what is a protected area. IUCN defines this as a clearly defined geographical space, recognized, dedicated, and managed through legal or other effective means to achieve the long-term conservation of nature with associated ecosystem services and cultural values. Conserved areas, in contrast, is a broader umbrella term focusing on area-based management that produces effective conservation outcome. So today, we have 5 pre-recorded lightning talks by regional experts that will explore key elements and issues of terrestrial protected areas. These talks will start with Fai Jumblut from Spret, which will highlight the status of protected areas in Oceania. The discussion will then move to the social dimensions with Jean and Jim Thomas from Tenkile Conservation Alliance describing their journey and lessons learned from supporting the establishment and management of Torricelli Mountain Range Conservation Area. Next, Professor Mark Hocking will then focus on the all-important issue of management effectiveness. Elizabeth Eresito from the National Trust of Fiji will then examine the issue of securing sufficient and stable long-term funding using Sovi Basin Protected Area. We will then return to Vi for the last lightning talk, who will highlight the role that the Pacific Islands Protected Area Portal, or Pipup, has in building capacity and supporting decision-making in the region. As you watch these lightning talks, please feel free, and I encourage you to make comments and ask questions. All of the speakers are online except for Jean, who had some other commitments this morning, but Jim is with us and are happy to make contributions to discussions and answer questions. We really want this to be an interactive session. So following the lightning talks, we will then have around 15 to 20 minutes Q&A session. So as I said, we're really hoping that this will be interactive. So thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate it. I'm going to play the video now, so please bear with me.
Hello and greetings. My name is Vainupo Youngblood, and I'm the Protected Areas Officer here at the Secretariat Pacific Regional Environment Program based in Samoa. A high percentage of land in the region falls under customary ownership. This context has empowered traditional governance systems of local communities to make decisions over the current and future management and utilization of their natural resources. This situation has provided a unique status for the Pacific region, and that community-based conservation represents the dominant model and paradigm followed. The countries and territories of Oceania have increasingly recognized the need to designate important areas under protection and management. Some have committed to individual action, such as Palau, Kiribati, Niue, Cook Islands, and Samoa, while others have organized and coordinated themselves to fulfill this goal. For example, the Micronesia Challenge, which has the goal of effectively conserving 20% of Micronesia's terrestrial resources by 2020. Protected terrestrial areas cover 31,979 square kilometers, or nearly 6% of the total land across the region. Since 2010, there has been a modest increase in terrestrial protected area coverage in the region, with around 13% of countries and territories having achieved their commitments in this area. The region-wide terrestrial protected area coverage is 6%, which is less than half of the global level coverage of 15%. There are 39 terrestrial ecoregions that lie partially or fully within the Oceania region. 6 of these have more than 17% of their extent within protected areas. 7 have less than 1% of their extent covered, and 13 have 10% or more of their extent within protected areas. In Oceania, the extent to which terrestrial protected areas are connected varies greatly. The largest increase in connectivity of protected land occurred over the period from 2010 to 2018, with the largest proportion of connected land being in Micronesia, and the highest level of land, being both protected and connected, found to be in the Pitcairn Islands with 58% and New Caledonia with 49%. Key biodiversity areas represent the global standard for identifying areas important for biodiversity. The overall proportion of KBAs covered by protected areas in the region remains low, with approximately 10% of mapped KBAs being fully protected and 26% partially protected. While there has been an increase in the coverage of important bird areas over the last several decades, their coverage within protected areas was considered to be quite low, at 27% in 2017. The remaining 64% of KBAs are not included in protected areas. The World Database on Protected Area has current limitations, with some countries reporting different figures in their 6 CBD national reports. And although 74% of countries and territories in the region have at least partially updated their WDPA data in the last 5 years, subsets of the data remain out of date. A considerable number of protected areas in the region do not have boundary data on the WDPA, with 6 out of 23 countries having more point than polygon data. This indicates that many areas are not formally mapped or their boundary data not shared. Importantly, within the protected area dataset, 44% of points have the governance type of local communities or indigenous peoples, compared to 38% of polygons. It is widely known that protected areas that are managed and governed by private actors, indigenous peoples, and local communities are underreported to the WDPA. This is particularly relevant for the region, where community-based management is the most common mode of area-based conservation. For example, in a dataset recently submitted by Vanuatu's government for review by SPREP, 85% of 182 sites had the governance type local communities or indigenous peoples. Some communities and governments are reluctant to share the protected area data, fearing that this may lead to tenure disputes or increased encroachment. As with most of the world, other effective area-based conservation measures, or OCMs, have yet to be formally identified in Oceania. Oceania is making a significant contribution to the global effort to conserve the planet's biodiversity, with over 30% of countries and territories in the region exceeding the Aichi Target 11 benchmarks for terrestrial coverage. However, further effort and investment is needed to create and manage networks of fully connected and representative protected and conserved areas. In relative terms, region-wide terrestrial coverage is 9% below the global figure. 64% of key biodiversity areas remain unprotected, and numerous ecoregions are below representation targets. While spatial extent of protected areas is easy to quantify, it provides little information about the quality of the area itself or of the protection provided and the resulting impact on biodiversity. Equally, achieving designated protection of a defined area does not end the process of support to sustain effective management. Lastly, accurate data supports our understanding of the state of protected and conserved areas in the region. Further mapping of area-based conservation measures are required. Furthermore, country data updates for the World Database on Protected Areas are needed to support national-level decision-making and reporting. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, it's Jim and Jean Thomas here. How are you? We are from the Tenkalei Conservation Alliance based in Papua New Guinea, protecting the Torricelli mountain range. And we are conservationists, and we've been working in PNG for 18 years now. And we began there when we heard of the plight of the Tenkalei, the world's most endangered or threatened tree kangaroo. Tim Flannery went in there in the 80s and early 90s where he researched them and quickly realised that their numbers were critical, less than 100. And that resulted in a captive planning specialist group meeting conducted by a number of zoos in Lae in Papua New Guinea in 1998. And that eventuated to the formation of the Tenkalei Conservation Alliance, which is a non-government organisation established in PNG, and now it's established as a charity in Australia as well. So we went over there in 2003 to work directly with the villagers who had the Tenkalei on their land. We established a hunting moratorium with them, And since then, we've been conducting a lot of community development work, some research, hell of a lot of capacity building, employment, and establishing the Torricelli mountain range as a conservation area.
So one of the biggest lessons that we've learned since working in Papua New Guinea is that it's really important to integrate the community development work with the conservation work that we were doing. It was obvious from us from the very beginning that if we didn't address the needs of the local people, then all of our conservation efforts were not going to achieve much. So our big focus now is to focus on community livelihood programs. We initially started with rabbit farming to provide an alternative protein source to the villagers to help them alleviate the hunting pressure. This evolved into chicken farming, and now we just focus on fish farming. So we've introduced different programs and materials to all of the villagers that we work with to help them minimise their hunting impact by having farmed protein.
And once we started implementing these protein projects and patrolling to the villages and living the life of the landowners and communities in the Torricellis, we saw that the health of the people wasn't really up to standard. It was quite below standards, a lot of grilly, a lot of scabies, waterborne sicknesses. So that's when we started applying for grants for water tanks and tin roofing. And this has really been the silver bullet, if you like, to the success of this conservation program by providing 350 5,000 litre water tanks with tin roofing to the villages within the Torricelli mountain range conservation area. This has led to a huge behaviour change where people have directly benefited from the conservation work they're committed to, and their lives have improved because of it. Waterborne diseases have gone from the villages by up to 80%. There is a hell of a lot less grilly, scabies, and the behaviour change stories, the significant change stories from the introduction of these water tanks has meant children are able to study their homework at the villages due to not being needed to collect water. The workload of women has reduced drastically in that they don't need to go to the rivers to collect water. The tank is right near their houses. So the health and the benefits has been paramount via the delivery of water tanks and now tin roofing to the villages. And it's these projects that the people have identified themselves as a priority for them. 3 projects identified and voted by the stakeholders and the landowners being tin roofing, water tanks, and now solar.
One of the fundamental things that you'll hear about in the conservation sector nowadays is to use a policy known as free, informed, prior consent. This is something that we've actually been implementing the whole time we've been working in Papua New Guinea without even realising it. And I think that it's been really key to really listen to what the local people have wanted and asked for, and being able to deliver on what they really want. We see a lot of times in conservation program when they're trying to develop the community livelihood projects, it's coming from a top-down approach, whereas we've operated from a bottom-up approach, which has been really important in terms of achieving success in this area.
And this has also led to sustainability. This year has been year of the COVID, and it has meant that we've had to step away from PNG and hand over the responsibilities to our staff there, and it has worked, and we're now in a position where we're now going through another phase in our organisation where will be greater responsibility and workload for the local staff, the landowners and the communities, and we'll be stepping back from that. So we're very happy with the progress that's been made thus far.
There's so much more to talk about, but we've run out of time.
So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. Cheers. Bye.
Hello from Australia. Those of you who know me won't be surprised to hear that I'm going to talk about the issue of management effectiveness of protected and conserved areas today. So management effectiveness is really about quality. It's about positive environmental and social outcomes for protected areas, supported by adequate resources and effective and equitable management. And as many of you will be aware, management effectiveness assessments have been widely conducted now over the last 20 years. If we have a look at the summary of what we've learned out of that, it's a rather sobering picture. This is a distribution of the number of sites achieving different levels of effectiveness, from completely ineffective through to very effective. And what it shows is that only about 24% fall in what we call the soundly managed range, and only just over half, about 60%, achieve a pass mark. So these results have led to an increased focus and care about the quality of management and governance. And a lot of that is coming from managers. In the early days of management effectiveness assessments, it was mostly driven by NGOs and by academic studies, but increasingly managers and agencies have become interested because they want to understand how they can improve management, how they can adapt what they're doing to achieve better outcomes. And we're seeing new and revised assessment tools being developed and applied very often through these agencies. So assessment systems focusing on issues of governance and equity that weren't well covered in early tools. Systems like the one in Mexico developed by the agency and applied across their system, and tools like IMET developed through the BioPharma program. And all of them have a stronger focus on issues around governance and particularly the assessment of outcomes compared to earlier tools. One of these is the management effectiveness tracking tool, the most widely applied of the management effectiveness systems. And we recently released a new and updated version of the MET 4. So this is a significant enhancement with a lot more attention to assessing outcomes for natural values, species and habitats, and cultural values, issues around climate change and connectivity that weren't available or that weren't prominent at the time when this was first developed. And it's available as an Excel tool, so it's able to be filled in online on the computer, and a dashboard to present the results in a much more powerful way. So this is just being released right now as I speak, in the next week or two, and will be available with guidance very shortly. One of the other recent developments is the development of a standard for protected area management, the IUCN Green List. The Green List mission is to increase and to recognise protected and conserved areas globally that are fairly governed, that are effectively managed, and that achieve positive conservation and social outcomes. It's the first global standard of what represents equitable and effective management, and it directly addresses these quality elements that I've talked about. It's based on what we've learned out of the work over the last 2 decades on management effectiveness evaluation. So if we go back to the graph that I showed at the beginning of the talk, the objective of the Green List is to shift this distribution, to move the curve to the right so that more protected areas are falling in that sound management range. So the standard defines what we mean by effective and equitable management. We're not seeking for perfection, but sufficiently good management to achieve positive outcomes. And the standard is a standalone. It can be used on its own, or it can be used as part of a certification program to recognise sites that have met the standard. So the standard is there and available to anyone, but for sites that want to go through the Green List program, there is a process to be put onto the Green List. The standard is based around 4 pillars: good governance, sound planning and design, effective management, and successful conservation outcomes, and 17 criteria that are used to assess that achievement. If you're going through the certification process, there are 3 phases: an application phase, self-assessment, putting together information, then a compilation of evidence and consultation with stakeholders, a site visit by independent experts, and then when the site has shown that it's met the standard, it's placed on the IUCN Green List. So, very short presentation. I hope it sparked some interest, and I look forward to talking to you online at the end of these presentations. So thanks very much.
It's my pleasure to join you on sustainable financing today. It is estimated that there will be around a 10% loss in global biodiversity by 2050. In Fiji, an assessment in 2015 revealed that Fiji was losing an average of 7,500 hectares of intact forest every year. Across the Pacific, there is a challenge to secure sufficient, stable, and long-term financial resources to achieve conservation success for protected areas. During this lightning talk, I will present an innovative, sustainable financing solution from Fiji. The Solvi Basin Protected Area is Fiji's largest protected lowland forest and one of the highest priority areas for conservation in the region, with high levels of biodiversity, endemism, and globally threatened species. Since 1984, the Fijian government, together with the Solvi Basin landowners and Conservation International, have helped to build capacity and support amongst communities to establish the 16,304 hectare protected area in 2011 through a 99-year lease with the Itauke Lands Trust Board and the Solvi Basin landowners. This is the largest contiguous lease ever granted in Fiji and represents an important step towards developing an innovative tool that conserves habitat while providing economic and social benefits. The Solvi Basin Protected Area is protected under a 99-year lease with the Itauke Land Trust Board. The lease is held with the National Trust, and CI provides supportive and technical advice. CI established the trust fund, which was established with HSBC Trustee Limited in Singapore. The trust fund was calculated to achieve a target of US $4.5 million to meet all the costs of the protected area for the 99-year lease period. To date, over $4 million has been realized through contributions from Fiji Water and the Global Conservation Fund. This conservation model was developed in full consultation with the various stakeholders. Economic incentives motivate and enable indigenous landowners to protect land in conservation areas, while legal rights ensure that they may still use protected areas for traditional land use purposes. When fully endowed, the interest income from the trust fund provides an ongoing source of funds to landowners for the royalty of standing trees, land rental, funds for the development and well-being of villages, and a management budget for the trust. Each of the 4 villages, irrespective of area, applies for the Fiji $10,000 per year for village or community projects at will. Village priorities for development and livelihood improvements are based on socioeconomic survey results. The lack of long-term investment in conservation has historically been a key limitation to effective management. The nature of the conservation process itself, which requires social change, improvements to civil society, and capacity building, are long-term and cannot be fully achieved with short-term grants alone in the typical grant-making cycle of 2 to 5 years. Conservation trust funds, therefore, provide a long-term financing that manage grants to conservation projects over long-term periods. The Solvi Trust Fund will meet all the obligations and activities required under the lease, such as ensuring the land rents, compensating timber royalties, providing community development opportunities, and implementing a co-management plan for the protected area. As the only major trust fund for nature conservation in Fiji,
Hello and greetings. The vision of the PPAP is to provide a doorway through which Pacific Islands Protected Area practitioners can share expertise and benefit from opportunities. And the slogan of the portal is connecting people, places, and knowledge. The Pipup Portal is a data and information management tool for Pacific Island Protected Areas. The portal is hosted at SPREP. It's been operational since 2013 and has been enhanced through support of the EU ACP Biopharma program. The portal incorporates relevant open source and other specialized information from a variety of sources. The portal currently has 634 national, regional, and international subscribers and over 5,000 information resources to be accessed by users. On annual usage, the portal recorded just over 22,000 users over a one-year period from last November up to now. The portal is continuously upgraded to ensure it remains user-friendly and meets user needs and priorities. It also includes coverage data for traditional models of conservation widely practiced within the region, such as community conservation areas, locally managed marine areas, marine managed areas, special management areas, and taboo areas, to name a few. The portal has a browser protected areas function, which allows users to easily view the protected areas and is a useful tool for comparing with other areas across the Pacific. The portal's country profile page provides summary statistics on PA coverage, useful for national reporting to multilateral environment agreements, and/or for referencing against national protected area targets. The portal has a weekly newsletter linked to it and is a great source of the latest news, notable events, employment, training and funding opportunities, and new tools and research. The portal also has produced a dynamically linked set of protected area maps, and these consist of regional, national, and some national maps with summary statistics. These maps are dynamically linked back to data, so the maps will change with every country update to the World Database on Protected Areas. The protected area coverage data currently displayed through the PPAP is dynamically linked to the World Database on Protected Areas. So, to ensure that data available through the portal is the latest and best available official data, SWEP has been working closely with governments and partners UNEP WCMC through assistance of the Biopharma program to conduct national data reviews and country data updates on the World Database on Protected Areas. So far, 9 country data reviews and WDPA updates have been completed, with the most recent updates being for Niue and the Cook Islands. A data review and update for Vanuatu is almost complete, and it is expected to feature in the January 2021 version of the WDPA. Altogether, these efforts constitute to just over 70% of the Pacific countries with updated data on the World Database on Protected Areas. To sum up, SPREP will continue rolling out training on the PPAP portal and the use of its tools and features. So far, 57% of Pacific countries have been trained. We will also continue GIS technical support for member countries, including training on open source GIS software such as QGIS and mapping, which we recently concluded for Vanuatu, Marshall Islands, Samoa, and Solomon Islands. We plan to conduct and integrate analysis of regional indicators into the portal. This includes regional marine species data such as for sea turtles. Also, we will further review and update user needs for the portal, continue to assist and facilitate country updates on the WDPA with the aim of reaching 100% coverage of countries by the end of 2021. We will continue PPAP maintenance, upgrades, and performance optimizations to ensure a good user experience. We will also maintain awareness and communications to continue promotion of the PPAP at various fora, continue the PPAP weekly newsletter, and capturing of case studies of portal use in the region. Future sustainability of the portal is an important issue, and we also will look at integrating the results of recent analyses of protected areas of the region, such as the Soko and the Sopaka. There is also a need to align the PPAP to the new protected area targets and outcomes from the new Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to Elizabeth, Jim, Jean, Mark, and Vi for those presentations. I found them fascinating, particularly how they highlight the diversity and challenges of having successful networks of terrestrial and conserved areas in the region. As you heard, the vast majority of terrestrial protected areas within the region are on customary lands, which is important. Coverage currently sits at 6%, which is well below the global figure of 15%. Moreover, there are areas that have low levels of representative and connectivity, with the exception of some notable countries and territories such as Pitcairn and the Micronesia countries. The presentation by Jim and Jean demonstrates the importance of supporting community development and welfare to underpin the success of conservation initiatives. For me, it was quite telling that the efforts of TCA shifted from focusing on introducing a hunting moratorium for the endangered tenkile tree kangaroo to development activities such as providing water, electricity, and shelter, which, as Jim highlighted, have had the greatest impact or the greatest influence for influencing behaviour change. Similarly, Mark highlighted the need for the quality of protected area governance and management to be improved. As Mark noted, only 24% of protected areas across the globe currently have sound management. In this region, there are only 20% of protected, roughly 20% of protected areas that have had PAMA assessments. So we really don't know the status of management here or the quality of management here, except for a couple of notable cases such as PNG and Palau. Looking ahead, the Management Effectiveness Tracking Tool and the IUCN GRI list offer some practical solutions for improving management. An important part of management effectiveness is sustainable financing. Sobi Basin Protected Area stands out as a case in point of how large protected areas can be financed to support community welfare and the management of the site. So as I mentioned earlier, the remainder of this session, we will have a Q&A session. A couple of questions, or there's been a few questions that have come through. So we will start with that. In particular, Jim seems to be getting quite a few questions. So I thought I would start with you, Jim. You know, I think the story of TCA is particularly interesting in the evolution of the conservation approach. So I wanted to ask you, is there anything that you would have done differently when you started your work in Torricelli in 2003? Also, I note there's a question around which species of fish that you're doing for the fish farming. Over to you, Jim.
Yep. Okay, thanks. I'll just answer the fish one. I'll just get onto that first. In 2003, when we first came, look, we came in totally green, hadn't been to PNG before, didn't know the language. Some of the things we would have done previously we would have learned pigeon before we got there. And I think we would have made more of an effort to try and get more sustainable funding when we started, because we went in and had to build up from there. So I think we would have tried to get a more of a financial base when we started. Apart from that, that's probably the only real changes we would have made. In terms of answering the fish farming, what we've done with fish farming is that we've observed that that's been one of the most, if not the most popular species to be farmed, or taxa to be farmed in the area. So we've trialled rabbits, that's still going, reasonably successful. We tried chickens, that wasn't successful. And we've trialled fish, and that has been successful. And what we've done is really just tried to improve the state of the fish farms in each village. So we've supplied materials for cement fish ponds, and that is better for producing fish. There's a greater productivity of fingerlings within a concrete fish pond from what we found. And that's really what we've been doing. The fish stocks themselves are introduced fish. They're tilapia and koi carp. we really haven't done much of the farming, and it's really been the people themselves who source their own fish stocks and then improve their own fish farming in that respect. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Jim. I might ask a follow-up question if that's okay. You touched on it before about how some of the livelihood activities such as rabbits, the introduction of rabbit farming, had some challenges, and I know that some of those were around, I guess, cultural reasons. Are you able to? I'd be interested to hear more about that, and perhaps what you learned from your experiences of introducing, I guess, new protein sources, which is particularly important in places like PNG, to communities.
Yeah, so rabbit farming was one of the first projects we implemented, and we did that due to rabbits being available in PNG. They were being farmed in Lae, so we sourced them from Lae and transported them to Lumi. Had the approval of the landowners and communities to trial it. There was some hesitation. Everyone was excited about something new, and when the rabbits came in, some villages were fine and did very well with rabbit farming, and you know, used them as a protein source. But then there was some cultural areas that looked at this animal and were surprised by the length of the ears, and spiritual beliefs started coming in there, and theories that if they ate rabbits, they would get big ears like the rabbits. So that was one of the challenges that we had. But we've overcome that through persistence and showing people that the rabbits are, you know, quite easy to look after. You don't have to get stock feed, which was the main problem with the chicken farming project, bringing stock feed into the remote area from the towns. And rabbit farming is still persisting now, 17, 18 years later, in many of our villages. And that project has been handed over to the people, and we no longer farm the rabbits in Lumi. And one of our staff members, Vincent Kellerle, who's been dubbed the Rabbit King, he's now bred over 900 rabbits, and he sells them and encourages other farmers and helps other farmers. And we've helped him in providing all of the material so that he has a very good and fairly sustainable rabbit farm.
Thanks, Jim. I think that the story of TCA is really interesting. I might jump over to Vi now. I see a question has come through about the Pipup and the SPREP library, around whether some of the, I guess, the publications and resources that we've been talking about today, whether they're available on the SPREP library for researchers and the public to access. Vi, are you able to answer that question?
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for the question. I believe part of that question is also geared towards Mark, but because he also featured a few resources in his presentation. But yeah, I mean, for the resources linked to the PPAP, a lot of them are dynamically linked and automated with the SPREP library. So a lot of the resources are sourced from the SPREP virtual library, but it's a combination with what you know, is continuously added on a weekly basis to the portal itself, and also linking to the regional protected, I mean, the regional Pacific Environment Portal under the SPREP Inform project. So yes, there's so, but I'll hand it over to Mark also if he wants to answer from his side on that.
Yeah, thanks, Vi. Yes, I mean, all of the IUCN publications are available through the IUCN website and can be downloaded from there. The MET4 tool is about to be distributed together with training material, and that will be up on both the IUCN site, but also the World Conservation Monitoring Centre. And so there, all of those resources are available through those sites. The IUCN Green List is about to get a new website that will have all the material. It can be downloaded now, but there'll be a new website launched a little later this month, so look out for that.
Thanks for that, Vi and Mark. It's great to hear that those resources are available to everyone. Vi, I might ask you another question. During your lightning talk, you noticed that you noted that there had been a modest increase in the coverage of terrestrial protected areas over the last decade or so. Do you have any thoughts on what factors or barriers may be causing or leading to this modest increase? Because countries within the region certainly have targets around that.
Thank you, Paul, for the question. In terms of factors, and as I mentioned in my presentation, a significant proportion of land in the region falls under traditional land tenure and customary rights. And I also cited the example from Vanuatu, where there's a high percentage of the total number of sites having where governance is labeled as residing with local communities and with indigenous peoples. So because of this unique situation where a large portion of the land is with the people, it generally takes a bit longer, you know, in order to establish community-based conservation, community-based management areas in the region, because you know, there are potential disagreements over where boundaries lie between communities. So I mean, land boundary disputes is a common feature of this. So the consultation process and information gathering takes just a little bit longer, but I mean, at the same time, it ensures that the process is well informed, and we, you know, that countries, governments, and also partners get it right, and also fully have the consent and ownership from the community level. In terms of barriers, while the situation is improving across the region, there still remains a lack of reliable information to assist the further expansion of terrestrial protected areas, such as information on habitats, species presence, abundance, and health, and also mapping of ecosystem services for certain areas. There is a reluctance of some countries to share the data, especially boundary data on community conserved areas, just because there's concern over the possibility of encroachment and a perception that it may adversely affect the customary rights of the communities. It is worth noting, though, that it has been easier for countries to establish nature reserves and national parks in areas that fall under government jurisdiction and ownership. Another issue, another barrier I would also point out is the capacity and administrative context of governments in most of the countries across the region, where, you know, environment units are generally small, and multiple areas of responsibilities or portfolios are designated to, you know, at most 3 or 4 staff. So there is an administrative burden. And also, so this, yeah, it does affect the capacity to really dedicate their time to, you know, move these things forward, to gather information, to do coordination. And also because high staff turnover in this situation is quite high, a lot of people do tend to leave, and they have a lot of this data on their laptop, and they take it with them. So there's no, the institutional memory in terms of protected area information sort of diminishes as well in that respect. Yeah, so thank you.
Thanks for that, Vi. A question has come in for Elizabeth, so I'll ask that question. So the question is, can you tell us more about the process of dispersing funds from the SOVI Trust Fund for management and supporting community activities? How does that work, Elizabeth?
Thank you, Paul. The National Trust signs an annual grant agreement with the trustee, and this disperses the grants annually to the trust. We cover the lease and royalty payment first, and this amount is stipulated in the lease document. It's reviewed, I think, every 5 years, and is increased by up to 5% when it's reviewed. The second distribution portion is for the community conservation and development. This payment isn't specific to individuals. Instead, it's based on the priorities for the community. Usually this is defined in their development plan or from the socioeconomic surveys. And an example would be agricultural development and taking producers to markets. It also covers conservation actions such as reforestation. And so what it does is it spreads the benefit to a wider community. And this is dispersed through an agreement that's signed between the community, the trust, CI, and it's managed by the provincial office. And the third stream funds the cost of management for the National Trust.
Thanks, Elizabeth, for that. Very interesting. I see a couple of other questions coming in. I guess I see that there's a couple of questions directed towards Jim about, I guess, the potential for the introduced species to become invasive and also around the impact on wild species as a result of the introduction of alternative protein sources. So over to you, Jim. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I've been writing them in the chat as well, but yeah, look, unfortunately, in the area we are, there are many introduced species of fish. Back in the mid-80s, there were 24 species introduced into the Sepik River, of which 16 are still present. And when people harvest from the Sepik River, they bring them up to market. So most of the fish we see at the markets for sale, and indeed in the village fish ponds, are tilapia, koi carp, and a few other species. I would much prefer to see native species be farmed, and certainly if there are avenues and funding to do that, we will investigate. So we're doing the best with what is available present, and we're helping people in terms of the, as I said previously, the standard of their fish farming and doing it more effectively, so that they're not impacting more on what's been impacted on the environment already. In terms of the biodiversity and less harvesting, we haven't done any direct studies yet on the consumption of village protein as opposed to wild harvesting. However, the biodiversity studies we've been doing, mostly concentrating on the Tenkalei and Waimang tree kangaroo, strongly indicate that the numbers have increased. The density, for example, both species is recorded as being much greater than it was previously, and the distribution of these animals is more so than previously. A good news story that came out in 2019 was a Tenkalei was found in a village outside the boundary of the Torricelli Mountain Range Conservation Area, meaning that we need to extend the area and include this village, but a very strong indication that the species is coming back, and the numbers are greater than 300 as our distance sampling data indicates.
Thanks, Jim. It's fantastic to hear that sightings of the tree kangaroo are happening further and further out. I mean, it demonstrates the success of your work there. There's been a question that came in about protected area management effectiveness tools. It was directed towards Vi, but I think also Mark can help us with this question as well. So the question was, have these tools been adapted within the region? I'd also perhaps like to add on to that about the MET4 tool, as Mark included in his presentation. And I'd like to ask Mark whether this tool can be adapted to country specific contexts in the Pacific. Thanks, Mark.
Well, thanks, Paul. I mean, IUCN would recommend that all of these assessment tools of management effectiveness or governance are conducted in a fully participatory way. So I think wherever they are, they should involve communities, and getting the views and perspectives of different stakeholders is a very important part of that process. Actually, the discussion, it's the process of undertaking the assessment that's probably the most useful part, because it brings stakeholders together to have those discussions around aspects of management that often don't happen outside of that context. So yes, we would recommend that participation is very strong. In terms of adaptation, tools, especially like the MET, have really been designed to be adapted to local context. So the MET tool for Papua New Guinea was conducted through a project some years ago. Not only was it translated into local language, but the items of assessment were adapted to suit the local circumstance. And the green list process involves that from the very start. The initial process is to take the global green list standard and adapt it to local circumstance, and that has to be consulted with the community. In terms of the new MET, the Excel tool, again, we expect it will be adapted. The adaptations like the one for Papua New Guinea, we hope will be integrated into the new tool. The Excel file is actually locked, but we're happy to provide the password to allow people to make those changes. We've locked it just to stop inadvertent change, but absolutely participation and adaptation is a key part of all of these. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Mark. Another question has come in for Elizabeth, and the question is, what are some of the lessons learned that the National Trust of Fiji have from the SOVI Basin Fund arrangement? Do you think this model could be applied more broadly in Fiji or within the region? Thanks, Elizabeth.
Well, I'd say it is possible to set up a model like SOVI in the region. There have been significant resources invested over many years to create the SOVI Trust Fund. And there are many categories of expenses. To date, the Trust Fund is 4.47 million. And that doesn't account for all the expenses to establish it. But you can capitalize the fund with a mix of national and international funding. You can have a combination of endowment, sinking and revolving funds from different streams. And I think one of the advantages of the trust fund is that it provides, very importantly, a good level of transparency and accountability, and it prevents misappropriation. So to operationalize the trust fund in a country, you would need to have a management entity that supervises how the funds are used, and more importantly, that the aims of the funds should be very clear, specifically its purpose and its function for the beneficiaries. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for that, Elizabeth. I think we've only got time for one last question. I also must apologise for the whippersnipper in the background. So I might direct the last question to Mark, and it's about the IUCN Green List. So there's been numerous countries across the globe that have adopted the standard. Are you able to tell us some of the benefits that have occurred in these countries by adopting the standard, Mark?
Sure, Paul. I'll give you a very quick rundown. The Green List program's expanding very quickly globally around the world now with more than 40 countries involved. So I won't go through all of those, but just a few of the highlights that have come out. Close to my home here in Australia, where we've been using the green list, getting feedback from some of the managers of the sites that have been involved. One of the things that they pointed out was that while they felt they had very good management, there were a couple of issues that it really got them to focus on and to develop further. So one of those was around really understanding what success looked like. So they did a lot of monitoring in their sites, but they hadn't set thresholds. They didn't know what success looked like, and the green list process forced them to get together with communities and with experts and go through that process. Another one of the spectacular successes, I think, has been in Egypt with Ras Mohammed Marine Protected Area. It went through the green list process around the time of the last CBD COP that was held there. After they'd finished the green list, it was what happened after that. So the first thing that the manager said was that the tourist operators came to him and said, "We've learned about this green list that you've done. We'd like to also match, good practices and standards." So we've got together and we've agreed that we're all going to seek green fin certification for good tourism operators. And the GEF project said, well, we'd like to expand this to other protected areas, and we'll give the resources that are needed to make the improvements. In Mexico, where they've put a number of sites through the green list process, but they say they'll only do it for, maybe 4 or 5 of their hundreds of protected areas, but they've taken the standard and they're using that as a basis for the management of their entire reserve system. And they used it as the underpinning for a new system of management effectiveness that I had in my presentation, the Efectividad system, which they rolled out across their whole system. So the standard, even though they're not going through the process, is actually influencing the whole of their protected area management system. So just a few of those. I think we really encourage people to use the standard whether or not they engage in the green list process.
Thanks for that, Mark. Unfortunately, this is really all we have time for. So I'd like to finish up by thanking all of the speakers who joined us today. I really appreciate it. It was really interesting, both the lightning talks and the discussion. So what I would like to do is encourage, I know there was a couple of questions that came in that weren't answered, we just ran out of time, but I encourage you to join us in the lounge after the session, and we can continue the discussion and hopefully be able to answer those questions. So with that, I would like to thank you all again for joining us, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the conference. Thank you.